Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and wonderful people of the internet. Welcome to today's episode of the Avalon News. Do you guys know what day is it today? Well, it's July 1st, or as some people like to call it, World Doctors Day. But you know what that means? Today is July 1st. What was yesterday? It was June 30th. And that's what's on our first news about June 30th, World Social Media Day. The history of World Social Media Day, why it came about, and probably we'll look into which was the first social media platform that came into being. The next news is about an interesting phenomenon. It's a physical phenomenon that's affecting especially a lot of those Western world. That's the concept of heat domes. We're going to go deep into what is a heat dome and how it even comes to being. Finally, we'll go a little away from our atmosphere into one of the recent space missions that is going to come, in especially this year, and why we are sending dummies and not what we probably refer to as dummies, why we are sending mannequins into space. All of that and more on the other side of this intro. Let's get it rolling.
Follow your passion might be a perfect question to ask and might have a perfect answer when interpreted right.
Let's start tracking which stocks can actually go up and go down, or which stocks have an advantage with the vaccine coming out.
Why it would have been more expensive to fake a moon landing back in those days. It's quite an interesting video to watch.
The economic activity created from the App Store alone is worth $500 billion.
So let's move on to the next question.
Man, it was too easy.
Too easy, no? Why didn't you answer? Okay, you're back. I hope you clicked on that like, that subscribe button, and that notification icon. Let's get started. Okay, let's get started with some numbers. Okay. Now I want you guys to not just listen to it, but process this. At least 3.96 billion people today are active on social media. That's about 49% of the world's population. 63% of those above the age of 13 are on social media. 29% of Indians are active social media users. And that's India. Now in America, 70% of Americans are social media users. So it makes a lot of sense, right? Since social media plays such an important role in our lives. Important whether it's a good or a bad thing, that's something we'll discuss. But let's have the first slide up. And that's where I want to go back into the history of social media. This website here, it's called 6degrees.com, was one of the first social medias that came into being. That was in the year 1997. It's 2 years after I was born. If you look on that website, you can see down there, even the spelling mistake. They've written there, already have an invitation with a code. So you can imagine, the complexity of these websites and how beautiful these websites were. But the idea of social media has been there since a really long time, right? On this website, what you could do is you could sign up, you could post some pictures, you could network with different people through invitation, they could share, they could connect with you. Fast forward to 20, 30 years into the future, and now social media is playing such an important role. We discussed about how doctors are so important during the pandemic, but another thing that's especially kicked in is our online lives. We've become hyper connected, or have we? Has social media made us more social, or rather asocial? That's what I want to bring out here. You see, the World Social Media Day was a concept that was introduced by Mashable in the year 2010, and the reason they did it is because they started to see, with the advent of social media platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, for example, they notice that the world is moving into a hyper-connected space online. And we wanted to celebrate that. And that's why Mashable came up with the World Social Media Day. But today that's so much more different, right? While we have filters and features, these things are making us, to a large extent, maybe asocial, maybe even disconnected with the world, maybe even unfavorable to our minds, to our health, our mental health. So while social media came up with, trying to connect the world, trying to make it a better place, it turned out to be a double-edged sword, right? Now I want to know what your thoughts are. Do you see the positive effects of it, or do you think it's time for us to log out? Right? And that's what we want to know, whether Social Media Day is actually a point of celebration or a cry, right? So leave that into your comments. Let me know, what do you think about this? So that was the first thing, right? If you realize, most of us spend, and this is another number, most of us spend close to 2 hours and 27 minutes, that's 2.5 hours every day on social media, scrolling. Why are we doing it? We probably justify it with saying things like, I'm trying to listen to news, I'm trying to gain some information, I'm trying to connect with people. But are you really doing that? Are you actually connecting with people? Now, 2 hours and 27 minutes per day, that's around 5.9 years in a person's lifetime. It's around 6 years in a person's lifetime that you're spending endlessly scrolling. Okay, so that was the first news. I know I started off in probably a different note, but as we talk about 6 degrees of, I hope you guys understand what the 6 degrees reference is. They say that, every person in this world is separated by others within 6 degrees, right? You know how first degree connection, second degree connection. So that's how the idea of 6 degrees came in. Now the second topic that we have is not 6 degrees, it's more close to around, say, 50 degrees Celsius. And this is the second news where we talk about the concept of heat domes. So in countries like Canada, USA, even Russia, what the people there are noticing is that the temperatures are almost as high as the deserts of Dubai. Now I want to explain what this is. Okay, so you can read about this, how some countries are actually facing a lot of problems. Deaths are happening more. I think around 230 people have died because of these heat waves. Now I want to talk about how this in fact came into being, right? For example, in countries like Russia, their permafrost is melting. What permafrost literally means is permanent ice. And imagine a countries where permanent ice, is no longer permanent. It's become temporary. That has been melting. So in fact, Vladimir Putin came into the news and he spoke about it. He spoke about the gravity of the situation. It's interesting to see how, since this is affecting some of the world's most dominant or monopolized or biggest countries, it's become mainstream news, right? Now let's explain what this is and how it came into being. So heat dome, it's this area where, think of it like the world is becoming something of a pressure cooker. Right? There's so much of heat, there's so much of pressure. How does this happen? Now imagine this room, right? This room out there. Well, you probably say that this room has a temperature of maybe 25 degrees Celsius, whatever. But in different pockets or in different areas of the room, the temperature is slightly different. In some areas, it could be 24.9, another area could be 25.1. So with these different changes, right, extrapolate this into the context of the world. Even in the world as a large domain, there are these many subdomains. And in these interactions, places where there's this high pressure and low pressure, an interesting phenomenon comes into play, which is called a jet stream. Now that's what we're showing in that diagram there, right? These jet streams, they take this undulating pattern. Undulating is another word for wavy pattern, right? Now, as these wavy patterns form of these jet streams, a very good example of what a jet stream is I think we can go to the next slide. Have you guys watched this movie Finding Nemo? Martin, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so this is a 3D representation of how this undulating pattern comes in. I'll discuss about this, but before that, just go to the next slide. Okay, now you remember the movie Finding Nemo? In that there are these turtles, and Nemo is in search for something. He's in search for something called the EAC, which is the East Australian Current. It's slightly more simpler to explain what these jet streams are, because you probably don't see these undulating patterns in the air in front of you. But in the ocean, it's a lot more visible, right? So think about it in a very similar analogy. In that show, what you notice is that Nemo tries to hop onto this jet stream, and that's very similar to how a lot of flights also try to do, right? Generally, for the aeronautical area, what they discuss is there's two ways to go about with flight travel. One is you follow the stream, one you follow the jet stream, and the other is you go resist the jet stream. Following the jet stream makes your journey a lot more faster, right? So that's talking about the positive effects of maybe jet streams. But one of the interesting phenomena that happens with jet streams is that during these undulating patterns, certain areas can start to form these pockets. And that's in the previous slide. Just go back, 2 slides back. You can see that area where it's like slightly warmer. So this air pressure gets trapped in these areas and they form this heat domes. Now the formation of these heat domes makes it even more hotter. Think of it like a bicycle pump. You're putting in that pressure, and as you push this pressure, the air becomes a lot more warmer. And by doing this, because there's a lot more pressure, it's preventing clouds, etc. also from forming. And when there's no clouds, what happens is the sun's radiation becomes even more powerful, which makes the temperature even harder. And that's the reason why countries like USA, Canada, Russia, where these heat waves are forming, the temperature are rising even beyond that you see in countries like Dubai or UAE. Not that those countries are not suffering. Yes, the countries there are even suffering beyond what they normally see, right? Iran, Iraq, UAE, all of these countries. But yeah, guys, that is the concept of what a heat dome is. I hope you got some sense of it, and that's the reason why I wanted to explain it. It's slightly technical because you probably don't see these undulating jet streams, but I hope the Finding Nemo example helped. All right, now let's go on away from our atmosphere into the space. That's the final use. So as we said in the start, we're planning on sending some dummies into the moon. And by dummies, I mean mannequins, or should we call them Moonikins, right? Sorry for the pun, but that was not a pun because that's literally what we're going to be calling this guy. There's an interesting note here. We're sending 1 male body mannequin and 2 female body mannequins. You guys know who is the first woman to be in or reach the moon? Well, we don't have one. We don't have a woman astronaut who's reached the moon or who's traveled or who's spent some time there. And with the current mission that's been planned, which is called the Artemis 1 mission, we're probably looking into sending the first woman into the moon. And to test that, we want to see, not just for the women, but women tend to have slightly more, they tend to absorb and get more affected by the exposure to radiation. So the reason that we're sending these mannequins, which have a lot of replica in terms of the skin, the vital organs, etc., why we are doing is so that we can test the response to the solar radiation. What we are doing there is, so what I meant by Moonikin, so the male body that we are sending, his name is going to be Commander Moonikin Campos, and Campos comes from the reference of another man called Arturo Campos, and Arturo Campos played a very instrumental role during the Apollo 13 mission. So during the Apollo 13 mission, while they reached the moon, they were trying to come back, and they realized, or even before they reached the moon, they realized that there was this problem with the oxygen tank. And because of this problem with the oxygen tank, the mission had to be aborted. So Arturo Campos was instrumental in guiding the astronauts back into planet Earth, back home. That's why we decided to dedicate this name. In fact, the whole name, Commander Moonikin Campos, was chosen by around 3 lakh votes. The other 2 names, one is by the German Space Agency and the Israel Space Agency, which is Helga and Zora. So these are the female body mannequins. So this is the first time where we're having something that's what's mentioned then, the gender inclusive crew of dummies, because we're sending 2 women. And what we're going to do is we're going to keep 1 woman as a control, right? By a control means we're not going to be giving this Astro Rad vest, which is the next slide. You can see the vest that is going to be placed. Yeah. So one of them is going to get this with the West, and the other one is not going to get the West. And we're going to see how these Wests perform against the radiation, and how the vital organs within, face this radiation and the effects of that. So it's exciting to see a lot of cool information there. The asteroid suits, we're probably going to be sending the first woman out there into the moon. So super exciting news. I hope you guys are super excited as I am. And with that, I think we're ready to close today's news. If you guys like today's news, if you learned something about which is the first social media, what are heat domes, what are asteroid suits, the Wests, about Arturo Compass, the Moonikins, etc. If you found something, do give us a like, because that really helps us. Drop in some comments. Love reading them at the end of the video. I don't do that right now because it's difficult for me to concentrate, but I do read all your comments. Thank you so much for all the love and support. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.